Welcome to our JAMS author interview series, where we take you behind the scenes to learn more about what we publish in the Journal of the American Musicological Society. I'm talking today with Dr. Cory Hunter, who is Assistant Professor of Music at the University of Rochester and the Eastman School of Music. And his article, The Gospel Love Album, Negotiating Articulations of Gender, Sexuality, and Realness, recently appeared in JAMS. Welcome, Dr. Hunter.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Can you provide me with, please, a brief summary of the topic of your article and the argument that you make?
Sure. My article is basically about how in the 21st century, gospel artists have really begun to be more transparent, more candid about sexual desire, intimacy, and romance. And so I use this frame called spiritual realness to describe how gospel artists are engaging the real by talking about sex, by talking about romance. And I argue that it's real within a conservative Christian paradigm because these are conversations that many conservative churches have not had openly. And so it's a very interesting topic, and I argue that in many ways they are doing this to sort of accommodate the fact that many people are departing the church, the fact that even, there are a lot of statistics talking about many single Black women who are in need of a spouse or who desire a spouse, rather. And so they are releasing these albums as a kind of quote unquote antidote to these various dilemmas taking place in popular culture and in society at large. And so I use T.D. Jakes's Sacred Love Songs album as a case study for understanding how gospel artists are engaging sex, how they are being more transparent or real, if you will, about sexual desire. And Bishop T.D. Jakes, he's, probably arguably the most popular Black preacher in America and one of the most popular preachers in the world. And so I argue that throughout this album, Bishop Jakes is using music, lyrics, as well as his very sensual baritone timbre to negotiate ideals of gender, masculinity, and sexuality. And I argue that he's expanding and reinscribing conventional notions of gender, sexuality, and masculinity.
So, what most fascinates you about your article's topic and this area of research?
I would say what most fascinates me about this particular topic is that it really unpacks how gospel artists are really trying to walk this very fine line between being edgy while still being accommodating, right? It's this line between being progressive while also being conservative, being subversive while also being very traditional, right? So I think it's very fascinating because it really speaks to how gospel artists and people within the Black church really try to have appeal outside of the Black church culture, outside of the gospel industry, which is still very a niche market, while simultaneously not offending the sort of standard bearers within the church and not offending those who espouse a particular kind of conservative theology. And it ends up being this very awkward sometimes dance that they try to negotiate in trying to have appeal to both sides, because they want to be relevant given these statistics that often say how the church is declining in popularity and people are leaving the church because of the lack of transparency and we aren't having these real conversations, but yet they can't go too far left for fear that they might lose the audience that is their main base, which is the conservative Black church. So that's a very fascinating point of tension for me as I do this research. You have this very Pentecostal Bishop T.D. Jakes, and yet he's moaning and groaning on this album in a very sexual manner. So it's a quite provocative topic that is fascinating on multiple levels.
So, can you tell us a little bit about how your article extends existing knowledge in musicology, in this subfield, or other important discussions about music?
Sure. So I believe that this article makes a very significant intervention in musicology on a number of levels. Firstly, I remember coming along as a grad student and saying that I'm doing a PhD in musicology, and I'm doing Black gospel music, and doing these different conferences and meeting different people, they would oftentimes look at me with a very puzzled face because at the time, even in the early 2000s, um, a lot of people just understood musicology as being very rooted in European analysis, right, or classical music, right. But musicology within the past decade or two has really become a lot more of a diverse field, and so it's not lost on me the significance of an article like this on gospel music in JAMS, right? And it really was not to be expected, I guess when I was a grad student, to see this kind of work in this kind of publication. And so I am happy to be a part of the ongoing conversation of diversifying the discipline, the ongoing conversation about sort of redefining what constitutes acceptable musicological analysis, right? I'm proud to be a part of that, and even methodologically, what I do in the article, I think, makes a significant intervention, just in terms of pulling from so many different disciplines. The way that I think, the way that I write is richly interdisciplinary because I think in order to do gospel music analysis justice, you have to pull from so many different areas. And so, I'm engaging voice studies, I'm engaging sound studies, gender and sexuality studies, the field of religion, popular music studies. And so just expanding the sort of disciplinary potential of musicological studies and what we pull on and how we talk about music within this discipline, I think does a lot of work. And I would say, lastly, conversations surrounding realness and authenticity, right? That's been talked about in hip hop studies, right? And in various disciplines. And so I believe I offer a kind of different, nuanced understanding of the real that could be very useful to scholars in music studies, as well as beyond the discipline.
So, what would you like a student or somebody new to musicology to take away from your article?
I would like for a student to take away from the article just the kind of rich, very rich, complex tapestry that is gospel music and Black church culture. It's such a rich, complicated tradition. And so I would want them to be more informed about the various conversations, the various tensions taking place in gospel music in the Black church, and the ways in which artists and preachers, lay people are attempting to navigate this particular tension. I would want them to take away from this article how gospel artists are really trying, and the Black church, the ways in which they are trying to stay relevant by, quote unquote, keeping it real and having these conversations that heretofore have been deemed as taboo and inappropriate in that particular space. So really just learning about the complexities of the tradition, the rich tradition, the conversations, the provocative conversations taking place within the tradition, how the tradition continues to evolve through this particular love album tradition. And I would want, especially maybe younger students in musicology, people being introduced to musicology, to just be aware of how the discipline continues to diversify, how it continues to expand, and just know, especially other musicologists coming along who may be musicologists of color, who want to do subject matter that is not within the sort of traditional musicological trajectory, to know that the discipline continues to expand, and to look at my work as expanding the possibility and potential of what musicology can continue to be.
Dr. Hunter, thank you so much for speaking with me today. This has been just fascinating.
Thank you so much.